And we are live at our webinar today. So we have four wonderful guests joining us for Boston Climate Week as we discussed circular healthcare and sustainable future. I'm delighted to be joined, and I'm just going to bring people on just to say a quick hello. And if you can please just introduce yourself and what you do. And then we're going to give a little bit of a preamble and get things underway. But again, welcome everyone. This is a dedicated healthcare webinar for Boston Climate Week, and we are excited to have you join us today. And with that being said, I'm going to across, kick things off with Tara Klassen, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I am Dr. Tara Clausen, and I am officially the Innovation Lead of Surgical Care Alberta with Acute Care Alberta. So my day job is the gizmos, gadgets, things that bang the programs and pathways of care that are made possible for all of the things in the surgical spaces. So happy to be here today to share my journey with all of you.
Amazing. Thank you, Tara. And then just working around my screen here, Miles, if you want to introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Miles Sargent. I'm a family physician in Hamilton, Ontario, which is near Toronto. I actually worked for Boston Healthcare for the Homeless. I'm not sure if it's still called that. About 20 years ago, I worked there for about a year, and still work in addictions in my hometown. And I'm also a hospitalist. But I think probably the main reason I'm here is because I'm the executive director of the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare, which has been around for 26 years now. Thanks for having me.
And you guys are doing some wonderful things. So as much as this again is Boston Climate Week, we did want to shine that international lens because I think you're leading by a lot of great examples, which we'll obviously come on to through today's discussion. And I think whenever we think about sustainability, clearly this is a global challenge that we need to address. So again, wonderful that we have that representation here with us today. And with further down the field, looking down in Florida, we have Brody Galloway joining us. So Brody, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Richard, thank you for having me. I'm co-founder and CEO of MedLink Intelligence. We're building the AI infrastructure to recover medical equipment value by intelligently placing it around the world to help those in need and reduce waste.
And Brody, I know you've got a wonderful story to share, and something we've tried to do every time we have sessions like this is really shine a spotlight on the innovators who are leading the charge. So, really can't wait for you to share more about what MedLink Intelligence is doing, and how you're solving some of these problems again that we face, not just here regionally but also internationally. And with that being said, I want to bring our last key guest and co-host into the equation, Sarju.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining, and we are truly looking forward to have a wonderful discussion with these esteemed speakers and panelists. But most importantly, looking forward to have some conversations in the aftermath of this webinar with all of you as well. So please feel free to reach out. By way of introduction, I'm a cardiologist and medical director of sustainability for Leahy and Beth Israel Leahy Health here in Boston and metro area, and also the founding president of a nonprofit organization called Sustain Health Solution, where we work with healthcare organizations, small and large, to help them on their journey of sustainability, and looking forward to it. Back to you, Richard.
Thank you. Yeah, well, delighted again to have such esteemed colleagues join us on the call, and really delighted for everyone who's joining this webinar, because I think as much as we discuss this, when it comes to sustainability, there are just so many problems. And so we really want to talk about what are the practical examples, the practical steps, how do we lead on making change happen? And I think, again, we have some wonderful leaders who are doing that today, and they're going to talk a little bit about how they're doing that. For a bit of background, for the past 3 years, we've been running an organization called the MedTech Sustainability Forum, where we've been actively learning again from our international colleagues, be that in Canada, particularly in Europe, where again, there's some pretty strong legislation which is driving a lot of this circularity and this drive to be more sustainable. And so again, where we've tried to engage and have sort of active discussions, our last one was 6 months ago to the day when, the Bellum Health Plan got launched at the latest COP meeting. And so these are great, wonderful frameworks. But again, what we really want to think about is how do we start to turn that into activity and outcomes? And so I think, Sarji, when we were talking before this, what are some of the problems that you're seeing day to day from within the hospital? Again, what are some of the things we're trying to address and that we need to tackle?
I thought you and I only had 5 minutes. I don't think I can answer that question in 5 minutes. But I think, before even I answer that, I'm going to actually, ground ourselves into the Boston Climate Week a little bit. And um, equally as Canada, I'm going to have to speak here carefully with my Canadian colleagues on call. Boston is and has been a hub for healthcare, right? And I think when we celebrate Boston Climate Week, and when we have such a wonderful, truly world-renowned healthcare organizations and cutting-edge innovators like Brody joining us today, as well in the ecosystem here, wherever you are physically located, Brody, today, but we consider you in Boston as far as ecosystem. I think we have both the obligation and responsibility, but also the wonderful opportunity to introduce healthcare field into this discussion of sustainability, because not just that we are, a huge polluter, accounting for greenhouse gas emission just from the US healthcare sector, which is larger than the entire UK economy, but also we bear the brunt of, on the other end of being affected, being the victim of climate change and environmental detrimental impact in two different ways, at least, if not more. And one is we see patients, right? When the temperature goes up or there is a flooding or any other climate disaster, we end up taking care of for those patients, their acute illness, but also their chronic illnesses get exacerbated. So very important for healthcare to remain engaged in this conversation. But second thing, which I think we are going to focus on today, is the operations. And operations itself has two major issues when it comes to the climate change or planetary health. One is we get affected, our buildings physically get affected. We had an event not too long ago where our OR was flooded. Massachusetts last year had, one of the highest amount of wildfire, which is pretty wild for state of Massachusetts. And I know as Canadians, my colleagues here, you guys are very familiar with the wildfire, with the historic fire in last several years, by the way, which we also received here all the way to Boston and, further south. And the second risk from operation side is the supply chain. We have the highest amount of drug shortages with our longest and very fragile supply chains today. The prices of the inventory which we need to work on day to day, whether that's a pacemaker or oxygen pulse meter, goes up and down like a stock market. And it's very hard if I wear a different hat as an administrator for the hospital or a chair for value analysis committee. Are we buying things for $2 or $20? And that matters when you talk about millions of patients we take care of. So these are the issues, and this is why we need to, stay engaged. During Boston Climate Week, healthcare is a key piece, I would argue, a centerpiece.
Very well said. And I think clearly a lot to be done, as you alluded to. But I think that framing in terms of the bigger picture that, Boston Climate Week, a fantastic series of events, amazing that this is bringing people together. But we want to make sure that that is again turned energy into this practical outcome. And so, you mentioned before, and we, with the Sustained Health Solutions hat on, that you are not just playing the clinical role, but you're actually again taking a lead. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how Sustained Health Solutions is thinking about solving some of these problems.
I think what we can't measure, don't measure, and don't see, we can't change that. And that's true for the sustainability as well. Most of the healthcare organizations do not know their environmental footprint today. Many organizations like ours, Beth Israel Lehi Health, we have a very detailed carbon footprint analysis. And I know Canadian Coalition also work with their member hospital organizations to help them, create their scope 1 and 2 carbon footprint. Having said that, I think the part of the problem, even for relatively advanced stage organization like ours or across the border, is we have been too focused on carbon And it's important, don't get me wrong, the greenhouse gas emissions are important dimension of climate change. But let's remember, climate itself is only one of the 9 planetary boundaries, at least those we understand today. It's important to focus on the water stewardship, whether that's a freshwater or an ocean, land-based system change that we create, but also we face the consequences of novel entities such as plastic. We use more amount of plastic, single-use plastic, I should specify, than almost any other industry on the planet, um, by a lot. Um, and the waste we generate, right? Where does it go? Just because it disappears from our DAX does not mean it really disappeared, right? The medical waste has a huge environmental footprint. So, we try to both educate and measure healthcare organizations their entirety of environmental footprint. But it's not educational directed organization, because we know education only goes so far. We try to connect these things with real outcomes, in sense of operations and the value or efficiency or inefficiency. Um, and I think that is what triggers the action eventually, not just the measurement or education, but how does that really translate into clinical operations, so that they can keep their doors open, provide the same or better care, but just in a more financially efficient way, and add a value to community as well as for the organization itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Tara and I were discussing, and you had this great medical grounds round you shared, Tara, that as much as we talk about the people which are clearly paramount and important when it comes to healthcare, the healthcare of our patients is so entangled with the healthcare of our planet. And so I think we do really have to think about those things through that dual lens. But of course, to your point, when it comes to the financial element, it's not just people and planet. A lot of this is driven by profit. And so again, I think I'm really excited to sort of dive deeper into some of those frameworks and case studies. But back to just what you were saying around sustained health solutions, how are you thinking specifically about that benchmarking piece and starting to get that common language and metrics? Because I feel like that's something which we're still struggling to do today.
Yeah, I think there are so many things that one can do and we do. But I think, staying on the point for the title of the webinar today around circularity, I think that's untapped opportunity many times. And I cannot tell you that even when I speak with many leading healthcare organization and their sustainability leaders, often the recycling and composting and, kind of good handling of the waste, which I'm not discouraging, gets mixed up with the circularity, right? So circularity is something comes way upstream, that how are we, reusing it, refurbishing, repairing, and keeping the material into the circulation, for sometimes at the same level, sometimes up using or upscaling, or sometimes slightly downscaling the use of those things. But how do we keep that from going to the waste? The recycling, composting, all the good stuff comes once the waste is generated. About how do we handle that? But the purpose here is to keep things in the circulation, and that creates a huge operational and financial opportunity as well, right? It's not just doing good things for the planet, which many of us feel is the right thing to do and want to do, but it's not that easy. It's easy said than to do when we have to also look at the balance sheet and how do we keep the hospital operational 3 months from now. Question comes on the desk of the healthcare executive. The planet takes the back seat, and whether we like it or not, that's a ground reality. But circularity is one thing where if we can go to the hospital and tell them, and this is what we do, that let us give, assess your circularity, and usually it's very close to 0%, if not truly 0%. How do we keep your devices into the circulation? That creates financial gains for them, because all this material that we can recirculate, gives either financial kickbacks or allow them to buy the same reprocessed material much cheaper. Secondly, it creates a resilience in their supply chain. They are not as reliant on virgin material coming from different parts of the world. So those are two major, benefits we can see with least amount of resistance.
So much needed. I think to your point around the supply chain, the circularity, if we don't understand and measure where we are today, we're never going to be able to track and improve on that. And I think you naturally have just teed up so much of what we're excited to hear from next around Miles and what's happening in the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare. I know, Miles, you've got a few slides to share, so
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you, Brody, for stepping in. Appreciate it. So this is one of our typical slides. This is our ideal green facility. So when we started really diving into this a few years ago, of course, that was the starting point. What might an ideal green hospital or sustainable, resilient hospital look like? This is one of many versions, of course. Next slide, please. I expect most people on today are familiar with this study, which came out in the Lancet now, gosh, hard to believe, 5 years ago. And this one was mind-blowing to me at the time. The fact that, so this is the supply, this is the carbon footprint of the entire English healthcare system, and in green is transportation, only 10%, building energy, the red piece is essentially inside the building energy at 8 o'clock, about 11%. So the big piece, of course, is supply chain, which is what we're talking about today. A ton of medical devices tied in here, as well as food is in here, of course. And medications, the first 22% of this pie, kind of a shock when you first see it. Next slide. And then we become educated, and anyone who works in the OR is probably not shocked by this, but this is Maria, who's an artist from the Netherlands, who asked her breast reconstruction surgery to keep all the waste from one single operation. I mean, that might be a 6 to 8 hour operation, but nonetheless, all the waste from one single operation helps to explain our problem with single-use products and the amount of waste that we create, and the fact that we should be moving toward circularity. Next slide, please. If you try to look up the life cycle analysis of a medication, actually there are places now you can find some information, but when I first was looking at this a few years ago, there was not much to find. I always joke that Big Pharma is a bit like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. No one goes inside. It's very secretive, so hard to do a true life cycle analysis if you don't know what's happening inside. So we took a different approach. We thought, let's look at the journey of a pill. What is the journey a pill takes? We picked clonazepam, which is, of course, habituating overprescribed medication with a whole list of adverse side effects. We looked at, when you do a life cycle analysis, you break things down into their boundaries. We looked at the excipients. It is funny, in med school, we don't necessarily learn much about excipients. The pharmacists know about excipients. These are all things, magnesium, starch, a long list of things which go into meds to make them digestible. That's the green part at the top. And then we, of course, looked at the active pharmaceutical ingredients at the bottom, and then they're put together, tableted, and then distributed. Next slide. It took us about 3 years to do this project. We worked with 3 Masters of Engineering students at McMaster University, and long story short, I won't go through all of this. This could take a full hour on its own, the way the journey travels. We looked at the areas of greatest mass, essentially. So you can look at the weights of where things are produced, and most of clonazepam is produced in Asia. That's why that route travels that way. This is showing a route that does go through the Suez Canal. Is the Suez Canal open today? I think so. Don't need to tell you. Sarju alluded to this. Supply chains are very complicated. This is not just a mitigation issue. This is a resiliency issue. This journey to Vancouver, and I will admit, we could have picked Toronto. We picked Vancouver. It's furthest to the west, made it a little longer, 62,000 kilometers in its production. Next slide. So Again, I am a family doctor. Being a physician in the system gives you a little bit of street cred. When I saw the problem, the supply chain, I actually started cold calling procurement leads around Ontario, the biggest hospitals in Ontario, saying, hey, do you realize you're the biggest solution to this problem? The way we choose our medications. So of what we used to call the 3 R's, I would say, of course, there's a whole list of R's, but the biggest one is refuse. Refuse products which aren't circular. And look, we can do that. We can write our RFPs to include competition for environment. There are places in the world you can't say the words ESG. I can still say ESG in Ontario. Tara can't say ESG. Of course, Massachusetts is a democratic state for the most part. You can probably say ESG. Anyway, do you have ESG language in your bids? Yeah, so really interesting. Most of these procurement leads had no idea. This was the end of COVID, so they were simply trying to get Tylenol to their hospitals, but they did join our group. Next slide, please. We meet every 2 months and we educate the procurement leads of hospitals about how to do, well, I'll call it green procurement. And what is interesting is we had a few of the big group purchasing organizations coming to our meetings. And we also noticed that Supply Ontario, so that's the provincial, so Ontario, for Americans who may not know, is 1/3 the population of Canada, including Toronto and Ottawa. Supply Ontario right now has a conservative government. It's actually a conservative majority. We are not as far right as as your Republicans are. Nonetheless, it's a conservative government. You wouldn't think they'd be interested in what we were doing, but they are interested, and they now co-chair this group, educating people on how to buy sustainable products. Why are they interested? You know, you might say that Trump motivated them. Obviously, Trump's foreign policies of wanting to, buy American and move everything to the States, obviously forces other countries like ours to create what we call in Ontario, Building Ontario Business Initiative. Essentially, can we build our products in Ontario and buy in Ontario? When you make things locally like this, we have environmental laws in Ontario. So if we're building them in Ontario, we know what's coming out of the smokestacks. We know what is going to the water, and we've also shortened the distance traveled. Next slide, please. Again, it takes a lot of work within healthcare to make an RFP for all of the different types of products that we use. What does the RFP look like for a scope versus a syringe versus a reusable gown? You have to think through all of it. People have done this. There are ways to find out. The other way you can look at this is look at the organization you're buying from. This is a long list here, but this is a list of, for the most part, not-for-profits that rate companies around the world. I don't think CDP is on here, Carbon Disclosure Project, which started in about 2001. Carbon Disclosure Project was asking companies to show their carbon footprint. You can imagine back then only about 100 companies did it. Now over 25,000 companies show their carbon footprint in their supply chains. So you can look at the companies you're buying from. Next slide. And the final thing, again, the way we try to move the needle is thinking, what are the biggest partners we can have? How can we change policy, et cetera? So obviously, working with Supply Ontario on the supply chain stuff is huge. Bigger than that is working with Accreditation Canada. I think in the States, your accreditation is something like JCI. I can never remember the acronym. But we have Accreditation Canada, which accredits every single hospital in Canada, 900 hospitals. And in 1 month, we're coming out with a scoring system, which is about climate action. And these are the 11 categories we're going to look at. It is 45 questions, and we're super excited about moving the needle in that regard. And that is all I had to say. So I'm going to pass it back to Richard and see where Richard wants to go from here. Thank you very much.
Well, that was just fantastic, and I think again, as I alluded to at the beginning, it demonstrates the leadership that you provided to take this forward. I think that's just one example of all the work you're doing. I do want to maybe quickly sort of say how much ESG is a misused term. Really ESG is risk management. It's about, again, if we look through that profit and that capital investment lens, it's about like, how do we think about the environmental, the social, and the governance risk? And I think there's, a lot to be said about if we start to do that, we can maybe convince some stakeholders about the reasons why we should be doing this beyond where people might have resistance for whatever reasons. And so I wondered if you had a sort of one final reflection there, like, again, from that stakeholder engagement piece, was there something that you take away to go, like, what was that thing that helped convince people this is, the right thing to do? Because I feel like the people listening, a lot of experts, a lot of people who are sustainability leaders within their organizations, again, what's that sort of practical advice where you can sort of start to turn people's mindsets and actually want to be involved in these projects?
In the case of Supply Ontario, I've said to them that the idea of manufacturing things locally is just a natural alignment with what we're doing. Like they haven't had to change their mission, vision, strat plan in order to align with us. They naturally align with us for the reasons I already expressed. And again, resiliency is becoming such an issue. Yeah. I mean, imagine if in Canada we did produce more of our own medications. That 62,000 journey would be no more. Okay. So that has been easy. The one place I will say where we don't align is they might proudly say, well, we do make single-use gowns in Ontario, which is better than buying them from a place as far away as Asia, but nonetheless, they're single-use gowns. We do have manufacturers in Canada, a couple of them at least, that make reusable gowns. So that's the one place that there's maybe a mismatch. And in terms of Accreditation Canada, that was a journey. That was developing relationships and trust, which of course doesn't happen overnight. So this has been about a 4-year journey, ending with putting out this scorecard to all the hospitals.
I think that's fantastic and truly aspirational. Working with the Joint Commission, we have something voluntary certification around the 6 points. Very few uptakes because it's voluntary, and we don't see that changing in the current environment. But at least it's a start, and I think we can always lean on to our neighbors like you to learn more. How do we take it from voluntary to something that is more meaningful, more widespread? And Health Affairs, one of the reputed journals, came out with a pretty convincing argument, I think yesterday or day before, the Community Health Need Assessment, CHNA as we call, to maintain the non-profit status in USA. All the hospitals have to do community-based health need assessment every 3 years. It's mandatory and so forth. And the argument is now with the rising climate issues, the climate and the vulnerability that creates around people's health, as well as the resiliency of the operations of the particular healthcare organization in that area, has to be a part of this CHNA. And I think those kind of things will eventually move the needle, regardless of what side of the political aisle you fall onto, because planet is changing, whether we like it or not, whether we accept it or not, and no matter who we vote for. So on that hopeful note, Richard, back to you.
Yeah, I think you made such a great point around trust as well, that ultimately everything does take time, and I know going forward there are clearly incentives for those who believe about why we should be doing this. But again, I think what the Canadian Coalition's been doing in such a wonderful way is some of the frameworks you've developed in open source. And so I would recommend for anyone who's not been on the site to check it out, check out some of the frameworks. I think there's some great things, not just about the measurement and how you get to that next place, but also from the investment angle as well. That being said, I do want to bring in our next speaker. And again, we have spoken a couple of times recently. Super excited because about champions, they don't come much better than you, Tara. And you're really taking all of these frameworks and turning them into activity and turning them into outcomes. And so please tell us more about what you're doing.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up where Miles left off, which is Miles came at you from the Canadian Coalition of Healthcare lens and that sort of leadership lens. I'm actually going to flip the script over to the inverse, which is the grassroots, ground roots, what can we get started sort of lens to help us bridge the gap between what are we seeing, what are we doing, what words are we using to talk about them to different people. Now, before I get started, I think it's important for me to orient you to Alberta. So many of you on the call might know of Alberta because we're the oil and gas province, okay? We're the Texas equivalent in Canada. So in terms of footprint, we are 24 times larger than you in Massachusetts. We have a big landmass. We have 2 million less people. And in the case of our sort of acute care distribution, we have approximately 100 acute care sites across the province. 50 of them do surgery, but the majority of the surgical procedures are localized to our urban, suburban, and regional centers, which are essentially 16 adult and 2 pediatric sites located as the regional hubs around the province. So care is coordinated where, 16 sites do, greater than 80% of the surgeries. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, first and foremost, I want to talk about Alberta and the planetary perspective because, as you alluded to, our smoke impacts all of you. In fact, prior to 2024, Alberta had the 4 costliest disasters in Canadian history, totaling $7.1 billion. This included the Fort McMurray fires, the southern Alberta floods where Calgary flooded. We had a summer of poor air quality. We had the grass fire evacuations. We also had the National Park fire that took out the Jasper Lodge. And ultimately in 2024, it was the single costliest national impact on weather. So as a weather year alone, it cost $8.55 billion, that's with a B, to actually address the climate impacts that happened. All of that, and for any of you who haven't evacuated a hospital, Fort McMurray taught us that one, it has long-lasting impacts to patient care. Our patients get sicker, impacts to operations, all of the supply chain pieces that we've talked about. But honestly, what it means is the call is coming from inside the house, which is, in the world of surgery, we have a tiny little footprint at your hospital sites, about 30% of your footprint, but we account for the majority of your waste, which means that all of the things that we incinerate then go up into the atmosphere, create worse climate situations, make our patients sicker. They come in. We now need more things to make those sicker patients healthy. Those then get into the waste disposal stream and the vicious cycle feeds forward. We're trying to undo that with foundational changes and strategies that start at the frontline efforts because, bluntly, sustainability doesn't play as a word because it is a politically loaded topic, right? Whether you're talking about the environment, you're talking about costs, we are a public payer system, a not-for-profit, like the government pays for all our surgeries and all of our things, not like you with your various, I'm going to go, insurance things of the world. So the reality is that we have a lot of different language around what does sustainability to be to the big talking heads. So if we go downstream into the front lines, let's focus on what we're doing now. So in our world, in the OR, we have all the single-use devices. And many of these things have manifested over the past 20 years as an overabundance of caution around infection prevention control meets innovation, where we all want to do more chips, more electronics, more smart sensors, technology, and whatnot. So the single use is the thing because you can't just put that into an autoclave and steam it out. You're going to destroy the chips. So we have these single-use devices in the OR. The staff says, not real happy throwing those in the waste stream. That's literal bags and bags, of waste going out to be burned, to be thrown away every day. Staff was unhappy. Plus, we pay for waste. So we're paying money to dispose of the things. In comes our vendor champions. In the case I'm talking about Stryker, but there's a multitude of them on the market. Stryker said, hey, we would actually like to implement a sustainability solution in partnership with your operating rooms. We'll put in recycling bins. We'll do everything. You just have to put the waste in the bin. We'll take it away as recycling, and it will enter our circularity stream as Stryker. We said this sounds great. We started in 2022. We have just got our stats in because it's annual report season. We have diverted over 147,000 items from the waste stream in that time. We have been onboarding hospitals over time. We have expanded beyond the footprint of the OR into the inpatient units where the pulse oximetry and the sequential compression device is used there. We now have 18 participating hospitals. Last year alone, 87,000 items diverted. We didn't pay to dispose of them. They didn't go into the waste stream at landfill or incineration or otherwise. Now, what does that actually mean in terms of carbon? Well, I'm going to say 87,000 sounds a lot more impressive than 1,400 tons of carbon emission. Just going to say it what it is, right? Like the one big number beats a carbon emission number. So we're going to go with the big number. Now, we love this. The waste stream, everybody's diverting. Now we have the ability, because what happens to those items in the waste stream? They're entering Stryker's supply chain and manufacturing. They're actually going back to be reprocessed and remanufactured. Now, Stryker hates to say it when I call it, but they Franken device them. So they break apart the pieces that we send them as the recycling. The parts that can go through a reprocessing sterilization cycle, go through that cycle. Things that need net new replacement get put back in. So it is a net new device. 100% of those devices are certified under quality approval. And each of those devices has a unique Health Canada license. So this is effectively a net new device to us. Well, this sounds amazing in terms of circularity, but, and the big but, it's not just about the sustainability. It comes back to workflow, clinical acceptability, all of these things that really matter in patient care, which is where healthcare doesn't get to follow just the greener pathways, but requires some other, levels related to your scoring and whatnots around expectations. It has to be able to do the thing in or on people. So we actually did a study with the support we trialed. We went over to one hospital site, and site-wide we replaced all of their sequential depression devices, the net new single-use devices, with the reprocessed and remanufactured devices. We did this for 90 days, just on people. So one SKU, one size, and this is what we ended up seeing, that we had over 90 days, there were approximately one issue with one device. We had nothing but positive responses from staff around that they worked. And in fact, the problem was they didn't actually like the packaging they came in, which had nothing to do with the device itself. It was just they felt that the shrink wrap was a little too shrinky and a little hard to open. They wanted the frustration-free packaging. That was the part that bothered them. Ultimately, at 90%, at 90 days after trial, more than 70% of our responses actually recommended adopting the remanufactured devices, just straight up from a clinical acceptability perspective, not even thinking about the sustainability or the waste stream. Then we actually started to look at the devices themselves and what we were actually diverting. We actually were able to provide approximately $13,000 in savings by doing this particular project, which actually equated to 68% cheaper to buy the remanufactured device for the same clinically acceptable purpose and divert it from the waste stream. So this is where we think we're headed in terms of the on people bucket. Now, when we get to the in people bucket, this is where it gets a little more tricky in terms of who's recycling, who's remanufacturing, and who was the origin parent story. So in the case of Stryker, they'll take all of their own things plus all their competitors. They'll put it through their packaging and they'll sell it back to you as Stryker. So this means that you may get a MyoSure or a LigaSure or a Trocar that might be from a different manufacturer now with the Stryker labeling, but it's equivalent, but not the same. And why do I say that? Well, in the case of proprietary things in the surgical world, everything comes with an extra unsticky coating, right? We want the tissue to just stay in the people and not get stuck to the device. So this is where you get into more trials to again face an individual assessment of clinical acceptability. This is where we're headed next with the support of our services. Now, what does this actually mean? Well, not everything is single use, not everything is remanufactured. So now we're trying to inform strategy. Are we going into this procurement supply chain where we want to go into the remanufactured space? The caveat being is that you can't buy just remanufactured things, right? Somebody has to feed the beast. So there is some net new that has to go into that circularity. So it's the strategy around, is a site adopting? Are you warehousing? Are we changing all of the SKUs? Are you actually using everything? I'm jealous of Miles because the Stryker Supply Warehouse is literally down the street from the Hamilton Health Center. So he's actually has access to everything, straight away. So those are the questions that we're actually working through right now for the single use. Now, if it's not single use, and this is the big caveat to the asterisk of the things, which is your other strategy then becomes the reusables, as Miles inferred through the gowns and whatnot. But this also relates to things like we moved away from metal clamps and metal handles and metal instruments and metal this and metal that, which, was in favor of this infection prevention control, ease of use of single use. But, and this is the big but, just because it's metal and just because you can reuse it, we still have to reprocess it, right? We still have to make it safe through an infection prevention control status, which now means you're going through medical device reprocessing, which is steam and energy and water and gas and people and like all of those things. So even when you start to say single use reusable, it's not just that simple as a decision. You actually have to start to inform strategy and look at this circularity in real time. So Richard, I think I'll pause there and say, happy to answer any questions, but this is where we get excited about what we see as future state. It's better for people, it's better for planet, it's absolutely better for the bottom line. And I feel better because I'm not actually paying for waste to be disposed of, but actually waste is taken away free to come back to me cheaper for things that I can use.
Incredible. And I think you alluded to at the beginning a little bit about the geography, and we were speaking about this beforehand, that you are making sure that geography is not a barrier. I mean, you're doing this all virtually. So for everyone listening on today's call, I was just so impressed by what you're able to do through this medium of video call that we've all become familiar with to actually empower people, to actually start applying those frameworks we were talking about before, but taking that holistic mindset. And so I think again, that sort of same question I think about we're posing to Miles is like, if you had a piece of advice based on the project you were discussing there, like what would be a sort of key takeaway for the audience today about how do they turn this knowledge into action?
Okay, so when you're talking to, and I'm going to say, we did a multi-scaled strategy, talking with the talking points for the things that mattered for the people who were making the decisions. So when we were talking to the frontline folk, we actually didn't mention sustainability because that wasn't part of what we wanted to motivate them. Our question for them was truly clinically oriented. Then when we went to leadership, we started to talk about things like dollars and cents, right? That's where they started to get the buy-in. Similarly, when they started to think about supply chain and access and whatnot, that was where we get into that balance of, is it going to be more work? Is it going to be easier? What does it take? Then we keep moving up the food chain, which is, if this works, right? Because it's not just about doing it once. Oh, we had a trial, right? This is where good innovation goes to die. It's actually about having a strategy about what are the questions that we are trying to inform and what are the paths that we are trying to pick, right? So you apply the same stage gates that you do to any quality improvement, any innovation project to say, when do I let this go? When do I proceed? And then where do we see this actually evolving to? Because if you don't have a vision about what this could mean at, I'm going to say scale, and scale could be site, program, service, patient pathway, hospital network, state, province, country, whatever, you don't have that big sort of guiding star vision, no one's going to buy into the frontline work because it's work, right? So you want to find a way to talk to everybody around what's in it for them. And then, and this is the big thing, when you start with the easy wins, which in this case was, I just had to put the waste in a different bucket. That was where we started from, right? That is not a workflow change. That is not a change management. There was no in-service for that. That was literally now there's a blue bin that says put these things here. And that was where we started. And then we started to know what we used, what we were discarding. So then that let us see the value of the remanufacture, not in jazz, handsy, airy, fairy sage, but actually, well, we diverted this many trocars. We used this many myosures. They went into this waste. We had site-specific, program-specific, OR-specific data. That is invaluable to making informed decisions. So that's what I would say is where we got started.
I think that's very
Incredible again.
powerful. And, I'm going to make two observations here. One, I mean, first of all, kudos to you and your entire team for taking such a mammoth task. One is you kind of didn't just have a pilot program, which I'm sure you probably did at some point, but you made it scalable at a system level, at a province level, and that's very remarkable. I think many times what we have seen, including at the hospital where Richard and I work, is we have many successful pilots by champions, but then it falls apart as it's now orange bin instead of a blue bin. So I'm going to keep throwing that in the blue bin just because it's difficult sometimes, the workflow integration. And I don't think it's on the frontline people. I think it's on the messenger like us. Where do we, convince people? Second thing is, I think you alluded to more work, right? What we have found sometimes, not always, kind of contradicting my first comment, is many times I see people coming to us very enthusiastically with the new initiatives which they want to lead and kind of champion that. And that creates this joy in medicine, because the burnout rate in medicine, half of the physicians and providers in general are questioning their existence in this field. 1 in 4 wants to quit clinical medicine. And, sustainability or efficiency or, just using the common sense, let's put it to that, right? No one can be opposed to having a common sense kind of integration. But that many times bring some joy back in medicine, that agency back to where it belongs and not just to the corporate decision making sometimes. So with that, I know we are at the mark. So Richard, back to you. So Brody can be, introduce and take it from there.
Absolutely. Well, Brody, while you load up your slides, I will just prime you and just say I think we've had some wonderful different angles here today, from the benchmarking and the measurement and again the frameworks, and clearly with Tara how you're turning those frameworks into positive action. And so why it's wonderful to have Brody on the call, who is a co-founder, I should say, and his co-founder Ben Champagne can't be with us today, but he's a Massachusetts native. So there's a Boston angle here with Brody and Ben's startup, which we'll talk about today. But that life cycle piece is so key to this, of understanding not just what equipment gets used for inside the hospital, but where it goes afterwards. And so it's so great to hear, Tara, what you're talking about in terms of some of those examples about the joined up thinking. Brody, I know you've got a great story to tell, and so I really want to pass it across to you, and excited to share everything you're doing today.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, so Tara, what you're sharing about, when what happens to the equipment when it is recycled or repurposed, and manufacturers want to get a hold of that equipment, whether it's theirs or not. So that tracking and being able to resell or refurbish that equipment, it's big right now. We're seeing a huge opportunity there. So just for a little background, I've been in the medical industry my whole life. I've had 3 open heart surgeries, 7 cath procedures, and I had all my surgeries in Miami, Florida. And seeing that many patients were flown in to, just like me, to have surgery in Miami, I realized that there's a big opportunity here in being able to give this equipment to those in Latin America or underserved areas to, 1, reduce waste of equipment, and 2, which is even a bigger, more important to me, which is, ensuring that these patients receive the care they need. So how can we recover surplus medical equipment through visible and intelligent placement. That's what I'm going to be sharing today. So to start, I know we talked a lot about this, but $5 billion in medical equipment sits unused around the world, is generated as waste through hospitals, manufacturers, distributors, and yet still hospitals around the world lack critical technology to treat their patients. Current efforts only result in about 10 to 30% of this equipment that is redistributed to underserved areas to actually be used. So there are currently medical supply recovery organizations that take this unused equipment and distribute it internationally to those who need it the most. But the efficiency is low as there's limited visibility into what needs exist internationally and what equipment can actually benefit clinicians around the world. So MedLink Intelligence works with a network of demand partners that operate a software that we've created to allow their workflow to be optimized. So they have equipment, they have needs. They can use those devices to, they can use our software to place their equipment to where it will actually be used based on real clinical data. And through that, we're able to see internationally what facilities need what equipment. And through that, we're able to receive surplus medical equipment from hospitals, manufacturers, etc., and place that equipment and so that it can really be used by these clinicians around the world. So with that, manufacturers, hospitals are able to know where their equipment is going, reduce financial loss, and ensure that their equipment creates real impact for patients around the world. So visibility unlocks value recovery opportunities. So when we talk about, for example, Tara, when you're saying that often Stryker will take Medtronic's equipment and put it back together and claim it as theirs. A lot of times, Medtronic probably wouldn't be so happy about that. If they're getting their equipment from that already exists and creating a profit and having huge margins. So that visibility is really important. So seeing where equipment goes internationally also protects emerging market and commercialization strategy for manufacturers. So if a manufacturer has equipment and wants to donate it through our platform, they can recover that value, and they also can see where that equipment ends up, which is really important to protect their strategy, their commercialization strategy. And then when this equipment does get into the hands of those who need it, it can be used to increase clinical outcomes around the world. So some points that I wanted to share, reducing carrying costs and storage costs. Tara, again, you shared a lot of equipment. When you do have the surplus equipment that's thrown away, it costs a lot of money to dispose of that properly. And there's really no reason to go that route when there are opportunities to actually recover value from that equipment, whether it's through strategic donations or strategic resale. So when we talk about people, planet, profit, there's really an opportunity to make a big impact in all of these sectors when it comes to visibility and intelligent placement. So we're able to reduce those carrying costs and storage costs, recover value from idle assets, match the equipment to those who need it around the world, compliance and liability trail, ensuring that your equipment is de-risked, improving clinical outcomes, protecting market channels and commercialization strategy, as I shared, and then reduce waste, right? Because that's why we're all here. How can we improve, the equipment that we're already using? How do we use it? So the big thing here, this is really available to all sides of the equation, right? There are mission teams and clinics internationally that need equipment. There are MSROs and NGOs, which we've just onboarded, or we just scheduled some onboarding for some users. And then there are hospitals and MedTech companies that are looking for ways to recover value from their surplus medical equipment through ways where they can actually have visibility on where their equipment is going, rather than donating it to an organization and losing all ability to see where it goes and who actually uses it. Especially with those larger devices, or those reusable devices, whether it's pulse ox or even in some cases MRI machines. So yeah, I wanted to keep this brief. I really wanted to open it up to questions. There's a lot of things that we might be able to go deeper on, and I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Brody. That was fantastic. And as we bring all of us back, yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Quick question to your point. It clearly adds a huge value, and kudos to you and your team for taking such a important thing, this converting this challenge into an opportunity. But do you think it could kind of have an unintended consequences where because now the Strykers and Cardinals of the world cannot take the Medtronic or Boston Scientific or whatever other equipments and reprocess that, would that have a negative consequences on the circularity?
So great question. Well, when it comes to, for example, like Stryker or gaining the equipment from Medtronic, it really comes down to, well, what do they do from there? They're selling this equipment for a lower value or a lower price. They can't sell that equipment. Usually they wouldn't want to sell it to their primary sales targets because they're already purchasing the equipment at top dollar. So now it's about discovering emerging markets, and we're seeing compound annual growth rates in emerging medical markets and repurposed equipment at 18%. So people around the world are looking for more cost-effective ways to improve their treatment. So to answer your question, I don't think it's a problem in that sense, as Stryker will be able to, as an example, Stryker that repurposes a product from Medtronic, they'll be able to have visibility into where that equipment could be sold without impacting their commercialization strategy in their emerging markets team.
Well, I know we're almost up to time, and Brody, I feel inspired from when I heard about your story, and the more we find out about what you're doing, I think it's a wonderful example. It certainly gives me a lot of confidence that we have people like yourself and everyone else clearly on the call who are driving that change. We do our hour now, but I'm just going to do a quick round the room just to everyone on the call with us. Just if you have like one call to action or to find out more, if you want to direct someone to a website or again, some of the information we've been talking about. I'm just going to whip around the room. So I'm going to start off with you, Miles.
Okay, I'll make it quick. Thank you so much again for having me today. Richard, you've already pointed people to our website, but I'll do it again. We are the Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare. If you want to Google that, Canadian Coalition for Green Healthcare. And we have all kinds of resources on our website if you're a clinician, or if you're an administrator, or if you are an engineer. So thank you all again.
Thank you, Miles. And Tara, please.
Honestly, I'm not going to call you out to see anything that I'm doing. I'm going to say, look around at your own facilities, your own workspaces, your own environments, and think about where your waste goes, and see if there's an opportunity there to have a conversation about circularity, procurement, resiliency, or any of the big topics that we talked about today. Try to understand yourselves, and then you pick your path from there.
Well said. Discussion. That's the first place you go to. And Brody, please.
So we're looking to partner with, whether it's manufacturers, hospitals, MSROs. We're welcome to help on those fronts, as well as international facilities that are in need of equipment. we're looking to service those as well. You can visit our website at medlinkintel.com and you can learn more there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Brody. And Sarju?
Well, before I go, I'm going to ask you actually the same question. What would you want to do, Richard? Can't just ask around the question without answering them.
Yeah, and I feel remiss because I got so excited about kicking us off today that I didn't really introduce myself. So I wear a couple of hats, like I'm sure many of us wear many hats. So Director of Innovation Hub along with Sarju at Leahy Hospital here in Burlington, but also the founder of U-Shape MedTech. And I mentioned, we've been really trying to create and foster the community for the past 3 years, along with our partners like Innovation Network, who've been real leaders, setting up the MedTech Sustainability Forum. And for us, it's about how do we collaborate? We'd really love after this to continue the discussion so that we could get some regular cadence. We can really have this continued learning, but also find ways where we can collaborate and share resources. And so I think as follow-up to this, you'll hear from me. I'll maybe be filling your inbox a little bit to say, well, what next? Is it another webinar? Is it a meeting? But clearly, is it actually an actionable project that we can take forward? So I'm thanking everyone again for turning up today and for Sarji for giving me a little time to sort of share my passion like everyone else, that we want to make a difference when it comes to circularity and sustainability in healthcare.
Wonderful. My call is simple. Even if we can change one tiny little bit thing, let's do that. There is no small action when it comes to sustainability and planetary health. So I would end there. We are about the time, but thank you everyone for joining today, our wonderful panelists and all the members of the audience as well. So thank you and looking forward to carrying forward this conversation.